Friday, everybody. Hope you're having a good day so far. Hope you're having a good week. Looking forward to the weekend. As always, my weekend doesn't start until Sunday. My weekend is Sunday and Monday. Um, but before I talk about anything about what I'm doing today, I want to go ahead and get straight to just doing our daily promise that we do and then jump right in. So it says, Then Peter said unto them, Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the remission of sins, and ye shall receive the gift of the Holy Ghost. Acts chapter 2, verse 38. Gifted with the very Spirit of God are we who have repented our sins and believed upon the risen Lord of the universe. Promised by Christ before he ascended to the heavenlies, the Holy Spirit will lead us in the paths of righteousness. Heed the word of the Lord and proceed in every good work until the Son of Man returns for his holy bride. Now, I like that. Acts is like one of my favorite books in the Bible to read. I really do love reading the book of Acts. I encourage you to go read it. In fact, read your entire Bible. I know they say you can do like a Bible plan to read the entire Bible through in 1 year. I read the entire Bible through in 7 months, so you can actually do it much quicker. Now, I suggest if you're trying to actually gain wisdom from it, you don't read through it so quickly. But I was determined that at the age of 35, I'd never read all of the Bible, and there's some books that I'd never read at all, and I was pretty ashamed of that fact. So I decided I was going to read it all the way through, and then I would go back and just read my daily readings like normal and actually study it. But I at least wanted to have read the entire Bible at least once in my life. Okay, so today's episode, normally, like on Fridays, I usually do a biblical episode or something like that, some kind of study. I had been reading a book. However, I have misplaced that book and cannot find it, which is why I haven't been reading it since the last episode I uploaded of me reading it. And I'm looking, it's got to be somewhere. I think it's at work somewhere and it got misplaced, or maybe somebody took it home because they thought it was there for the taking. Sometimes we'll leave books there and, anybody can take it and read it because that's why they're there. So maybe that's what happened. I'll find it. Or I'll just eventually go and actually purchase another one if I have to. Because I do want to finish reading it. Even if I don't finish on the podcast, I myself wanted to finish reading it. So today I wanted to do something different. If people who are close to me know, I am majorly into true crime. I like to hear about people that have gone missing, or I don't like, it's not like that type of like, it's very sad, obviously, or when people are murdered or something like that. I don't mean I like it in that sense. What I mean is I've always had a fascination with why people do the things that they do, and it's something that I wanted to do for a really long time, is to be a crime scene investigator. And that was until I saw my first dead body in real life, which was a kid that went to my high school that had died in a car wreck. He was not a friend of mine. I knew of him. I went to the viewing of his body with my best friend Kristen, and because she didn't want to go alone, and that was the first time I ever seen a dead body in person, and it thoroughly gave me nightmares. And at that point, I realized I do not have the stomach nor the heart to actually do that job. And because I suck at math and science, as far as that type of science and math goes, even being in a forensics lab and testing things that come in and things like that, it's not something I could have ever completed because I'm just horrible at math and science, which I'm sure you need a lot of for that type of career move. So I backed out of that and I decided that's not what I wanted to do. Anyway, so I found this YouTube channel. My mom told me about it, called Kendall Ray, and she does a lot of true crime. She does other like non-true crime content as well. Um, but I love her true crime videos, and she tells a really good story. And even watching cases that I've heard many times over, it's always a new perspective through her, and so I enjoy it. Check her out, Kendall Ray, Ray as an RAE. And also, she does not make money from YouTube. She does make money off of selling merch, but she donates some of that profit to organizations to help with victims' families and things like that. And sometimes she gets in touch with the victims' families, or they vice versa get in touch with her to bring awareness to cases maybe that are unsolved at the time, and they'll come on and they'll do recording segments to put into the video. It's a really awesome thing. In fact, I just posted one of her videos, and I'm going to talk about it today, about Jessica Easterly Durning, which is up to this point still an unsolved case. And they are asking for you to post the hashtag Jessica Justice for Jessica, sign the petition to get the new DA that's just been elected to open the case and look at all the evidence again, because they still have a lot of questions but no answers. So the whole thing that set me off on this was a lot of the cases that I have been watching her talk about are completely mishandled. And while right now we have this weird obsession with tearing down the police and trying to make them look racist and everything like that, I believe that police in general are good. They're good for the communities. They help people as best as they can. They protect people. I do believe that. I know several police officers. They're my customers. They are great, great people, men and women both. But we can't just be so blind as to say they are good 100% of the time. And this is not about racist police. This is about police that mishandle cases and evidence, and that while we're demanding racial justice from the police, which we already have, I feel like we should be demanding them to be more I can't motivated to solve crimes. I understand that sometimes they do hit a dead end, and they've been trying and they've been working vigorously to find out what happened and they just hit a wall. I understand that. But there are cases where it's like they just don't do their job. And you have to wonder why. And why are more people not demanding that they do better when it comes to that kind of stuff? Because that seems to me to be where the problem really lies when it comes to police work. And this is not your patrol officers. This is going to be your detectives, okay? Patrol officers aren't out there doing these jobs. These are your higher up ranked police officers, your detectives. Sometimes it's FBI, whatever. So I want to bring awareness to some of these problems and what happens when things are mishandled. So, like I said, the first story I want to talk about is the unsolved death of Jessica Easterly Durning. And this is a wild story. There's a lot of things that are unknown about this story, but there are some um, text records between Jessica and her best friend of kind of what was going on before she went missing. However, she was found. She was found dead, but just what this family has gone through and is still going through is very sad. So this is from medium.com. Jessica Easterly Durning was a woman known for her outgoing personality and was a joy to be around. Despite having friends and family who lived in other states, she maintained close contact with those she cared for and loved. It was one of those loved ones she called in her time of need, but it would be too late to help Jessica. On August 12th, 2019, so this is very recent, Jessica, age 43, called her best friend, Maria Krill, from her cell phone in New Orleans, Louisiana. However, Jessica could not reach Maria on the first try, so she frantically called back repeatedly until she got Maria on the phone. Jessica asked Maria to drive from her Alabama home to pick her up because she was afraid to go home to her husband and stepdaughter. Jessica didn't go into details with her best friend, so Maria never had the opportunity to find out why Jessica was so scared. Maria wasn't able to leave home right away, but made arrangements with Jessica to pick her up the next day. Maria waited to hear back from Jessica to confirm the pickup time. However, all remained quiet from Jessica for 2 days, which made Maria nervous. So on August 14th, 2019 at 9 p.m., Maria received a message from Jessica's Facebook account, but it wasn't from her friend. It was Jessica's husband, Justin Durning, and he wanted to know if Jessica was with Maria as she hadn't been home all day. He then went on to tell Maria that he spoke to Jessica around noon, but hadn't seen or heard from her since. When he got back home from work, he told Maria he found Jessica's cell phone, ID, cash, and car keys, but she was not there. And the weird text message exchanges was she said she was going to send the police over right away. He's like, I know how to make a missing persons report. Do you think I did something to her? And he said that he was told he had to wait 24 hours to file a missing persons report. The dispatcher told her best friend Maria that that is not true. You can file one immediately. I've also heard that, but I am under the impression that they tell you that because they don't want to start an investigation if it ends up just being something simple. They don't want to get it all started. But in fact, if you keep pressing them, they will start it immediately. So Maria called the police department in New Orleans and requested that they go to Jessica's home to do a welfare check. When they arrived, Justin recounted the story for them and decided to file a missing person report on Jessica. Jessica's family was also worried, but her sister Audrey knew something was definitely wrong and she couldn't get her on the phone for her birthday on August 17th. Jessica had never gone a year without speaking to her sister on her special day. So Audrey and her sister Amanda decided they needed to leave their home in Mississippi to deal with it. They intended to speak to the police regarding Jessica's whereabouts, but first took a look around her neighborhood to see what they could find. So 2 blocks from Jessica's home, the sisters encountered a foul odor that prompted them to get out of the car and look closer. Audrey walked towards the tree line of a wooded area and made a horrifying discovery. The body of her sister was lying on the ground in front of her. Mind you, this body had been laying there in the Louisiana sun in the middle of the summer um, for an entire week. And neighbors did end up telling family members that there was never a police presence in the neighborhood doing a search for Jessica. So either they did a small search and didn't find her, or they just didn't do a good enough search, or that body was dumped there later, but doubtful with how decomposed the body was at the time. Um, After that, when they get her into the morgue, it then took 3 months to identify her body. So because she was so badly decomposed, they had to take her DNA, her mother's DNA, and initially they lost the first DNA that they took from the mother, and they had to do it again. So 3 months finally goes by, which is November 8th, 2019. Then they released the autopsy report on January 15th of 2020. She had an injury to her nose. She had a fracture on her jaw, a broken rib, and a broken vertebrae, which is like the base of your neck, which a lot of people end up breaking this vertebrae in their neck when they have a quick movement, a quick jerk of like a car crash, and it affects you being able to breathe. The police, however, try to say that the broken rib may have possibly come from them when they moved the body, but we don't know. Um, so the toxicology test that had to be done directly from the liver because of her decomposition, it came back positive for methamphetamine and bu- bupropion. Um, so methamphetamine, we know those are uppers. People like to take, for uppers and things like that. And then the bupropion, it's sold under Wellbutrin and Zyban, among others. It's an atypical antidepressant primarily used to treat major depressive disorder and to support smoking cessation. So, she was on antidepressants, and some people did speak out about her husband, saying that he did like to take different kinds of pills that were uppers, and that they thought maybe he mixed the methamphetamine with her antidepressant to throw off her behavior. And I don't know what exactly happens when you mix these two medicines together. Um, so the bupropion, apparently it says here, is sometimes used for methamphetamine dependence. Um, but it says that mixing those two will increase the level or effect of methamphetamine oral by altering drug metabolism. So taking a methamphetamine with that increases the methamphetamine effect. So why that was done, we don't know. Um, but they weren't sure that it was related to her death. So ultimately, the medical examiner listed her death as undetermined, and the decision led the police to file her death as unclassified instead of a homicide, as there was little evidence to determine what killed her. However, Jessica's family was positive she had met with foul play. I mean, the injuries that she sustained clearly would suggest some type of foul play, at the very least. Also, that vertebrae at the base of the neck that was broken also can be broken through strangulation. So her body remained at Orleans Parish Coroner's morgue for more than 500 days while the investigation continued. Um, and then instead of releasing her remains to her husband, her family demanded custody of her remains so she could be buried in Mississippi. Mind you, she hadn't been released to her next of kin yet because her husband never went and claimed her body. That's why it stayed there. So while her case remained open and active, her family didn't feel the police did enough to solve her case. They appealed to the district attorney, Jason Williams, who's the new DA. The district attorney agreed the investigation needed a second look. They believe she was murdered on the day she went missing and that her body was dumped near the woods by her killer. And they vowed to keep fighting for Jessica until her case is solved and her killer is behind bars. Just in case you want um, to be involved, if you're listening to this and you know anything about it, you can contact the New Orleans Police Department, 3rd District, 504-658-6030. 6030. Or you can call the anonymous tip with Crime Stoppers, 504-822-1111. Um, and a lot of people are also being asked to, like I said, sign the petition and also email or call the DA's office and request that they start doing more for this. Um, this was actually written July 22nd, so just last month. So we're still at a standstill of not knowing what has happened. No new information has been released. I don't even know if there's any new leads. But her husband is very suspicious, and it would not surprise me if he is the one that killed her. He was apparently very abusive to her. But my question is, why were they unable to find the body when they supposedly searched for her? When it was just a couple miles from their house, and it wasn't even really hidden. It was there for her body was there for an entire week. They lose the DNA initially and have to do it again before they can ID the body, and it took them 3 months to do that. She laid in the morgue for over 500 days before being released to her family so they could finally have a funeral and get a little bit of closure, and then all the injuries that she sustained, and they still declare it undetermined. That just seems odd to me. So, this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that gets mishandled by the police. And also why we probably shouldn't completely and blindly support them if they're not doing their jobs properly. And this is not the only case. I forgot to pull this one up. Um, this one was really crazy. Um, so this one here, okay, this one is still ongoing as well. Um, not this one, but let me see if I can find like the story of it so I can tell you exactly what happened. Um, I'm trying to see if I can find it. Let me see. Okay, we'll just pull up Wikipedia real quick about this one. So this is Kristin Smart, and she was legally presumed dead on May 25th of 2002. Um, they presumed her to have been abducted, raped, and killed at the end of her freshman year of college on the campus of California Polytechnic State University. So she was really drunk one night after a party, and three students escorted her back to her hall of residence. So there was three people helping her. One peeled off and went to his car to drive to his hall because it was further away. So it was another guy named Paul and another girl named Cheryl that were walking with her. And Cheryl's building was right there, so she went ahead and peeled off, even though she wasn't too comfortable leaving her alone with Paul, but she did. And Paul claims that he walked to his building, which is 40 yards from her, at her building, watched her walk to her building, go safely inside, and then he went inside. This is where she went missing. Okay. Um, so approximately at 2 a.m., I just told you all of this. So originally authorities believed she was on an unannounced vacation, which is nuts. All of her stuff was there, her ID, her wallet, her money, all of it was in her room. So clearly she didn't go on a vacation. Um, so this is now why um, there's the Kristin Smart Campus Security Act, which requires all public colleges and publicly funded educational institutions to have their security services make agreements with local police departments about reporting cases involving or possibly involving violence against students, including missing students. Because when her friends originally went to the campus police, they dismissed it. So they went to the local police, they also dismissed it. So on April 13th of 2021, Paul Flores, which is the one who said he saw her walk into her building, and his father, Ruben Flores, were arrested on the suspicion of her disappearance. Their homes were searched, and investigators found numerous items of interest, which, until I get to this other article, I don't know what those items are. But if we look at the official investigation, so she was only reported missing after a week when her family called the police. So everybody knows, first 48, right? You watch it, you've seen it. The first 48 hours of someone that you suspect to have gone missing is the most crucial 48 hours of their life, because the longer the time goes on, the less likely you're going to find them alive or even find their bodies. So they took them a week. And volunteers did search for her. They were riding horses. Some did use some ground penetrating radar devices. So during the Lacey Peterson investigation, there were unfounded rumors in the media that Lacey's husband, Scott Peterson, had something to do with Smart's disappearance due to their simultaneous attendance at the Cal Poly campus. But I'm pretty sure, well, we do know they're not tied together. The thing is, her body has never been discovered. Um, so the guy Paul, who they did suspect of murdering her or abducting her anyway, his dad and mom were separated and lived in two different homes. When they did come in and bring him in for questioning, he was real antsy and anxious to leave. He said he had somewhere to be. He said he had to be at his mother's house to clean up a mess, and he said it was cement. So that's when they got the search warrant for the home, his dad's home. And they found like newspaper clippings about her disappearance, but that was about it. but they didn't know at the time there was a completely different residence that his mother lived in. So they did end up getting a warrant to search her property, but only after she moved out and rented the home to a couple who started getting letters not addressed to them, but addressed to Paul's mother, saying that she needs to come forward. She needs to tell the police what her son did, death threats, things like that. So they kept them. One day, Mary, I believe is her name, found something shiny by the wheel of her by the tire of her car, and she picked it up, and it was an earring, and it had like this red rusted fingerprint on the back of it. So she put that up and kept it. Eventually, they ended up handing that over to the sheriff's department to be used as evidence, which they never called Kristen's family and told them that they found this piece of jewelry so they could identify whether it was hers or not. And when they found out about it, they went to ask to see it, and they had supposedly lost it. So they never got to see that piece of jewelry to see if it was hers, nor did it ever get tested for DNA on it. So after that, they evicted the family out of the home that found the earring and was getting the letters. And Paul's mother moved back in. And there was a lot of weird stuff that went on that summer at that house, a lot of construction. Some man claims that he had seen them digging probably what would be like a body-sized hole, and drop something heavy that looked like a rolled up carpet into this planter box, fill it with cement, and then cover it with dirt. And when they went and searched this house with the warrant, they really didn't do much of any type of searching. And even though they had ground penetrating radars, they weren't sure what it could be. So they decided not to dig it up, because if they had caused too much damage to the cement and there was nothing there, it would cost a lot of money to replace it. Not only that, when this other family was living in the home, they kept hearing this alarm go off at 4:20 a.m. and they said it sounded like an alarm from a watch. And they would go outside and put their ears to the ground, trying to figure out where this alarm sound was coming from. But then one day, it just stopped. And if you didn't know this, Kristen was a lifeguard and had to be at work at 5 a.m., so it would make perfect sense to set her watch alarm for 4:20. And it's funny that they kept hearing it and then eventually it stops because the battery obviously died. So it's really crazy. Um, so they never did anything with the earring or anything like that. On September 6th of 2016, the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office announced they were investigating a new lead in the case. They had cadaver dogs from the FBI, and investigators spent approximately 4 days excavating an area on the Cal Poly campus. They never found anything, though. Um, After 3 days, items were found at all three dig sites located on the same hillside near Smart's dorm, but that was it. There's really nothing they can go on with that. Um, they said the items are being analyzed to see whether they are connected to the case, which could take days, weeks, or months. Also, they took cadaver dogs into all the buildings, and the dogs led them to a particular room, which happened to be Paul's room, and led them specifically to his mattress, the box springs. So they pulled that out of the room, and the dogs still went to even just the bed frame and also a trash can that was in the room. So then they gather up all these trash cans and that trash can and put them all in a room, and the dogs still picked out that particular trash can. So James R. Murphy um, represented the Smart family on a pro bono basis. They did Denise and Stan is her name, Denise and Stan Smart. They did take a civil case of wrongful death against the Floreses, and one of the three students who walked Smart to her dorm, which would have been Paul. So they denied that they had any involvement, and then the lawsuit was frozen in court. And then the Flores family also filed a lawsuit against the Smart family for emotional distress, which was also frozen. So the sheriff's office, they regularly supposedly reviewed the case, spent thousands of hours and dollars between 2011 and 2016. The FBI had her on file as a priority missing person investigation and a $75,000 reward. Terry Black, who was a Delta area man, offered a $100,000 reward for Smart's body. So, September 30th, 2019, musician Chris Lambert released a series of 10 podcast episodes, and it recounts in detail Kristen's probable abduction and subsequent death at the hands of another student. The podcast has been downloaded over 12 million times, and it's renewed the public interest, and it led to a new billboard being put up. And I think the podcast is called In Your Own Backyard, if I can remember correctly. January 18th, 2020, the Stockton Record reported that the FBI informed Smart's family that additional news about her disappearance would be coming and that the family might want to get away for a while, but did not provide any specific information. But January 22nd of 2020, they issued a correction. The FBI did not contact the Smart family, but a retired FBI agent who had been in contact with the family for years was the source of the advice. On January 29th, the San Luis Obispo Police Department confirmed that two trucks owned by Flores had been taken into evidence, which had gone missing for a really long time. One was stolen and one had been sold to somebody else. But they got it back. On February 5th, 2020, search warrants were served for specific items of evidence at 4 different locations, 2 in San Luis Obispo, 1 in Washington State, and at a home in Los Angeles County. Flores was briefly detained during the search. Then, April 22nd, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was served at the home of Paul Flores in San Pedro, California, and that the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department assisted those detectives in the search. They found numerous items of interest, um, but they did not say what they were. But there were computer towers, cell phones, electronics. These were decades old equipment. February 11th of 2021, KSBY reported that Paul Flores was arrested by the Los Angeles Police Department in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. On March 15th of 2021, a search warrant was issued to search Ruben Flores' home, including the use of cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. An older model Volkswagen was towed from the home of Ruben Flores after cadaver dogs searched the vehicle. On April 13th, 2021, Paul Flores and his father Ruben Flores were taken into custody by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in relation to the case. Paul Flores was charged with murder. Ruben Flores was charged with being an accessory. Investigations later concluded that Paul Flores attempted to rape Smart, although Dan Dowd, District Attorney of the County of San Luis Obispo, had stated that the statute of limitations has expired on a sexual assault charge, but murder committed in the course of rape or attempted rape justified first-degree felony charges. So, Senator Mike Thompson passed 61-0 the California State Legislature and signed into effect by Governor Pete Wilson on August 19, 1998, the Kristin Smart Campus Security Act, and it took effect on January 1st, 1999. But here's the thing. Now, maybe even taking this case seriously from the very beginning wouldn't have done any good. Who knows? Maybe she was dead that same very night. But just imagine if she wasn't, and they had actually started doing the investigation and the search for her immediately. What if she happened to have been still alive at that time? What if they were keeping her? I mean, you just don't know. And I want to know, unless it's in this other article, why have they not dug up those planter boxes that has cement poured halfway through it? You can't grow anything in a planter box like that, so why would you have it there? And with all the mysterious activity that people reported, why was that not dug up? That I don't understand. Because they were there. And supposedly, they believe that her body was buried under the porch, under the deck of his father's home, and then later moved to another location, which I believe is in that planter box. So, they are in, this is as of August 5th, which was day 4 of the hearing. Um, so we already know everything that happened at the investigation. Um, so there's documents of a lawsuit claiming that Ruben Flores moved her body. In additional to the criminal case against Paul and Ruben Flores, there's a civil case against the Flores family. Judge Craig Von Ruin, who is presiding over the criminal case, said he will look into whether these documents can be provided. Paul Flores' attorney, Robert Sanger, asked that if possible, these documents be provided to the prosecution to determine what may be used. So the preliminary hearing will resume on Monday at 9 a.m. So they're already pretty far into this, from what I can tell. So they had first-time witnesses, evidence brought into court. Witness recounts walk to dorms with Kristen and Paul. The investigator roommate told him Flores joked about Kristin Smart after teen went missing. Yes, he had told his friend about being with her, and then his friend joked and said, "What did you do with her?" And he said, "She's she's having lunch with my mom," is what he said, supposedly. Um, it's really crazy. So I'm hoping that this is solved, but to my knowledge, to this day, they still have not recovered her body. That's what's really, really crazy, is that they've not been able to recover her body. That makes no sense, because there are absolutely so many places that you could find that body. Um, why they haven't looked on the mom's property, I don't know. But this is the lawsuit about it. So it's really weird that even to this day, they don't have her body. I cannot get that. It's so weird. Um, yeah, so at this time right now, they have not been able to do so. Anyway, so it says here that through their actions in removing the remains of Kristin Smart from its location and moving some to an undisclosed location or locations, committed acts of such viciousness, depravity, and cruelty as to, by their very definition, cause severe emotional distress to plaintiffs, the natural mother and father of Kristin Smart. Man. This says compounding the initial acts perpetrated by Paul Flores and defendant Ruben Flores and defendant, Kristin's body was moved yet again and disposed of by defendant Ruben Flores as part of his attempt to protect his son from the consequences of Paul Flores' sexual assault and murder of Kristin Smart. By the way, they also pled not guilty, both of them. Um, so yeah, that's what's going on with this. It's just I still have questions of why they haven't searched that other property yet. That's what I don't get. So, uh, moving on. Tony Jones, okay? This is from 2018. So, Tony Jones was hitchhiking around Australia on a 6-month working holiday. From Townsville, he planned to hike 90 minutes to Charters Towers, where he would crash before walking the next day and heading to Mount Isa to meet up with his brother Tim. So he's been missing since November 3rd of 1982 and presumed murdered. It has never been solved, although the family feels they are getting closer. I don't know if this is one that's mishandled or not. Well, we're just going to see. So, they've been relentless in seeking justice over the past 36 years, but have faced numerous roadblocks. The case has become one of the most high profile missing person cases in Australia history, notably also because it was grossly mishandled by police, many of whom have subsequently been tried or charged for corruption. It is emblematic of the Queensland police culture during the 1980s, which the Fitzgerald inquiry found to be deliberated by misconduct, inefficiency, incompetence, and efficient leadership. So, brothers Tony and Tim Jones spent a week in late October 1982 staying at the Sun City Caravan Park in Townsville with two other travelers. Tim set off on the arduous 900-kilometer ride to Mount Isa, and Tony opted to take a quick side trip to Cairns. I don't know how you say that. Um, he was there for less than a week, but he clearly made an impression there. The most high profile piece of bungled evidence in the Jones case came in January 1983 when police received an anonymous letter claiming to know the whereabouts of his body. The letter was postmarked from Cairns and read, "I believe body of A.J. Jones buried in or near Fullerton River bed within 100 yards west southside Flinders Highway, Lochel." Okay. So police searched the area for 2 days, and then dismissing the letter as a cruel hoax. Jones's family wasn't sure, and they urged police to use DNA profiling in an attempt to identify the letter writer. The police declined this request for years, until sheepishly admitting in 2007, 25 years later, that the letter had been misplaced some years back. Even more compelling piece of information was completely mishandled at the time. A witness told police he had joined both Jones and an older man at the Rising Sun Hotel in Townsville the day he stopped in for a meal. The older man had picked up Jones earlier in the day and suggested they stop at the pub for a meal before heading to nearby Charters Towers. The witness struck up a conversation with the pair and who told them of their plan. This was the last time that Jones was seen alive. The witness provided a sketch artist with a detailed description of the older man, his vehicle, and identifying scars on his arms, but it wasn't until 1992, a full decade later, that police actually published an identikit picture of the suspect. So why the delay in revealing this information to the public? Well, the suspect looked strikingly like one of their own. The identikit picture was published on November 2nd, 1992, a decade after he was last seen alive. Within 48 hours, police had filled in numerous calls that claimed the identikit sketch matched a former policeman, as the Townsville Bulletin put it, namely Mervyn Henry Stevenson. The vehicle and scars were also a match. So at the time, Stevenson had just retired from the force after 35 years of service. Um, that saw him rise from rookie bush cop to tiny township of Cohen, superintendent in charge of the Townsville PD. He was a storied character, but less than 2 years after his retirement, his reputation was leveled by charges of corruption. A confidential police report accused him of being involved in cattle stealing and failing to adequately investigate various drug-related offenses, nor the suspicious suicide of a fellow officer. These charges were dealt with internally, meaning they required Police Commissioner Terry Lewis to approve. He vetoed the recommendations of the police report, and Stevenson was never investigated. The opposition police spokesman at the time, Terry Goss, was incensed, tabling the confidential report in Queensland Parliament. Instead of the normal procedure being followed and the suspects being charged and brought to trial, there is intervention at the highest level. When I say at the highest level, I mean within the police department, as a consequence of which no charges are brought. This wasn't an isolated incident. Terry Lewis was subsequently charged with 23 counts of perjury, corruption, and forgery, one of which involved him forging Queensland Premier Joel K. Peterson's signature on an official police statement. He was stripped of his knighthood and sentenced to 14 years in prison. Mervyn Stevenson died in December 2001, and he was inducted into Australian Stockmen's Hall of Fame. So it wasn't until early 2002 that the findings from a long-delayed coronial inquest were passed down, declaring Jones a victim of homicide despite no body being found. Because there was no specific place of death, no death certificate was able to be issued until 2006 when Queensland law was changed. The family reviewed the inquest documents in 2007. They were astonished to find a number of important leads that were neglected during the investigation. Witnesses who came forward in 1982 weren't interviewed until 2001. Other statements and evidence taken at a time were missing or dismissed, and the investigation didn't start until 3 days after a missing person report was filed, and only after the distraught family traveled from Perth to Townsville to file it in person. His dental records were lost and replaced with those of Anthony Jones. Coroner Ian Fisher was unimpressed, saying more attention should have been given to early investigation. So the Jones family petitioned the Queensland Attorney General Cameron Dick to reopen the inquest, which was ignored until 2010 when the government launched a campaign entitled Walk a Day in My Shoes. Jones's other brother Brian seized the opportunity, sending Dick a pair of Jones's shoes with a note that asked him to walk a day in the shoes of a victim of Queensland crime. Moved by the symbolic gesture, Dick reopened the inquest the next day. In 2011, the family met with more examples of gross police incompetence. A grazier told the family that in 1982, he had handed in evidence found at a campsite in Cloncurry, a township 780 kilometers from Townsville. He and a retired police officer had stumbled across remnants of camping gear as well as a letter addressed to Jones by his mother. Despite the importance of these artifacts, nothing was done, and it seems to have been lost or destroyed over the decades. It took a further 9 months from the time the family were alerted of this evidence for a search of the area to be conducted. Given the 29-year lag, this turned up nothing. Detective Acting Inspector Mick Walker told media at the time they were still investigating what happened to all the evidence. 2 days after the search, a former prisoner made a more startling claim. A man who was incarcerated at Townsville Correctional Center in 2000 told police his cellmate, Michael Laundress, admitted to a murder back then that strongly matched that of Jones. This confession came a year before the inquest begun and 18 years after the murder. So the prisoner didn't make the connection to Jones until late 2011. I did a bloke in out near Mount Isa, Laundress apparently confessed. He was hitchhiking at the time and I buried him out there. This seemed like the most substantial breakthrough to date. However, by this point, the inquest had stalled, being marred by excessive delays and the replacement of the coroner mid-inquest. In 2015 of October, Laundress died without making a statement. The inquest was still on hold. The most substantial lead to date had been allowed to extinguish. This is nuts. This is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that's so crazy. Um, They are offering a $250,000 reward for information on Jones's death is still available. Now, I don't know if this has been solved yet. I need to see. Um, let's just see if they found anything. Is the um let's see what this says here in Wikipedia. Unresolved leaves, cold case playing cards. Huh. I don't even know what that means. When was this one written? So this was July 31st of 2019. So we still don't know about this unless there's another one. I guess not. So let's see. Yeah, so as far as I can tell, this has still not been solved, and maybe his body is still missing. As far as I can tell, um, there's a couple other things I want to talk about, but I'm going to take a break and go get me a drink of water, and I'll be right back. And I apologize too. This is going to be an extra long episode, because sometimes I think this kind of stuff is very important to discuss outside of politics and everything else, because in a dangerous world that we're living in, when things are so much worse than they were 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago, that we all need to be more hyper aware of our surroundings and the people that we encounter, because anybody is capable of anything. Okay, this next one from ProPublica.org. This was written back in 2013. It's about a missing boy and some evidence. Um, they had some evidence against his accused killer, but for some reason they chose not to record his interrogation, um, which could, that can affect your case when you're doing that. So, shortly after 7 a.m. on May 23rd, 2012, New York City detectives transported a disabled former construction worker named Pedro Hernandez from his home in Maple Shade, New Jersey, to an interrogation room at the Camden County Prosecutor's Office. Days earlier, the detectives had received a tantalizing tip, and they now believed they might be on the verge of solving one, one of the country's most famous missing child cases: the disappearance 33 years earlier of a 6-year-old Manhattan boy named Eaton Patz. 33 years, remind you. The case had both frustrated and exhausted police since 1979, when Patz, allowed to walk to the school bus stop alone for the first time, vanished. Alleged sightings of Eaton had poured in over the years. Leads were chased as far away as Israel, but no conclusive answers had ever been produced, a frustration rooted, and at least in part, in the lack of eyewitnesses or physical evidence. The boy's body was never found. There was no actual crime scene. No fingerprints or DNA ever surfaced to aid the dozens of investigators who had been drawn into the case. But several people, including relatives of Hernandez, had emerged to tell detectives that Hernandez had occasionally talked of having harmed a young child during his long ago stint as a bodega clerk in the Soho neighborhood where the Patz family lived. And court records indicate that in a brief exchange inside Hernandez's home that May morning, he had said enough to warrant a trip into an interrogation room. That Camden interrogation room, it turns out, was fully equipped to do what a growing body of expert opinion has insisted to be done in such moments: a full videotaping of a suspect's interaction with detectives from the start of an interrogation to any possible formal confession. Judges, defense lawyers, and even many prosecutors have come to see such comprehensive videotaping as the single most important factor in securing reliable confessions and preventing the wrongful convictions that can stem from false confessions. In New Jersey, where Hernandez was being questioned, taping interrogations in homicide cases had been required by law since 2005. The detectives, however, never turned the cameras on during what would become 7 hours of interrogation. They remained off, in fact, until 2:57 that afternoon, when Hernandez was finally ready to formally confess. In a series of taped statements, Hernandez, a 51-year-old man with no formal criminal history, said he had lured Eaton to the bodega's basement with the promise of a soda, instantly choked him, placed him still alive in a plastic bag and then inside a cardboard box, threw the boy's book bag behind a freezer, and carried the box in broad daylight several blocks before placing it on the sidewalk. He said he had not known the boy, and he offered no motive. Manhattan prosecutors used his confession to gain a murder indictment against Hernandez, publicly disclosing no other evidence, and a trial has been set up for the spring. Prosecutors still have to clear a legal hurdle before using the confession. At a hearing in March in state Supreme Court in Manhattan, Hernandez's lawyer will seek to have the confession deemed illegitimate, in significant part because of the failure to record what went on in the Camden interrogation room. ProPublica has spent weeks reading the court file in the Patz case, interviewing the people to whom Hernandez had supposedly confessed over the years, and speaking with law enforcement and legislative officials who have pushed to make taping interrogations in New York mandatory. We found that the accounts of two people who have told investigators of Hernandez's supposed claims of once having harmed a child not only conflict with each other, but bear little resemblance to the particulars of Hernandez's confession to police. One of the people, for example, said he had claimed he had once killed a child, only he said at the time that it had been a black child. The details in Hernandez's confession did not match the few accepted facts of Eaton's disappearance. For instance, he said he lured the boy from the school bus stop, but years of police work have long established that Eaton never made it as far as the bus stop. Just months before Hernandez was arrested, Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance and New York Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly, the two men now overseeing the Pats case, served on a state task force that called for the mandatory taping of interrogations in New York, citing it as perhaps the single most important tool in preventing wrongful convictions. Several former Manhattan prosecutors said opinion is divided in Vance's office about whether there is sufficient evidence to pursue a conviction against Hernandez. In court papers, Hernandez's lawyer Harvey Fishbein has said that his client's confession is a consequence of a long history of mental illness, and as a result, it is not surprising that prosecutors have found nothing to substantiate it. Okay, I'm not going to continue reading on right now. My issue with this is that if you have someone who's like mentally ill, mentally unstable, you can easily coerce them into giving a false confession. And I think a lot of the times, because cops get lazy or detectives get lazy or exhausted at delving into the same case over, all these years. We're talking 33 years, right? And people want answers, that they find this guy and they're like, they see his condition and they're thinking, man, we can easily manipulate him into making a confession. We won't record it so they can't see us manipulating him into doing it. And then we tell everybody that he confessed. And then, case solved, case closed, right? And I think that that does happen. I do think there are people that are wrongly convicted that are coerced into giving false confessions. I absolutely believe that that happens a lot. And I think it just people just want to be done because they're tired of being, burdened with everybody constantly asking questions and wanting updates. So they just do it so they can just be done with it. Um, so I mean, it's really not fair. Um, so it says here that in the fall of 2012, according to a person with knowledge of the meeting, emerged confident he had persuaded prosecutors to exercise their discretion and abandon the case. Fishbein never heard back, and on November 13th, 2012, he received a call from a reporter asking him for a response to the news of Hernandez's indictment on murder charges. This indictment is the outcome of a lengthy and deliberative process involving months of factual investigation and legal analysis, Aaron Dugan, a spokesman for Vance, said in announcing the indictment. We believe the evidence that Mr. Hernandez killed Eaton Patz to be credible and persuasive, and that his statements are not the product of any mental illness. The grand jury has found sufficient evidence to charge the defendant, and this is a case that we believe should be presented to a jury at trial. Um, Fishbein has said any such attempt will only cause more pain and disappointment for the Patz family and the city that was consumed with their tragedy. Um, so, did he get charged? So, apparently, this guy here, Jose Ramos, was supposedly looked at as a suspect, it looks like. Hmm. Supposedly, Hernandez was violent and possessive. So this is Pedro Hernandez with his lawyer on November 15th, 2012. Um, so he was talking about how they can be manipulated and they can believe through the interrogation tactics that they actually committed the crime. They may say, I don't remember it, but maybe I did do it. And I've seen that happen too. Absolutely. Hernandez said in his confession that after he strangled Patz, he tossed the boy's backpack behind a freezer in the bodega's basement. But Fishbein notes in court papers that the backpack was never found, despite the fact that the basement of the bodega, including that area, would have been part of the NYPD's comprehensive and massive search for clues in the boy's disappearance. Um, So it says a person who has looked into the bodega's operations told ProPublica that Hernandez's narrative is improbable. The owner of the bodega, the person said, was vigilant about who got access to the basement, which had both a lock on the sidewalk trapdoors and a locked gate underneath them. No one but the owner, now dead, had keys to the basement, and because he was protective about his beer stored there, he accompanied anyone who went. At that time of day, the person said it also wouldn't have made sense for Hernandez to be stocking the storage shelves. He'd instead have been buttering rolls for the morning customers. Yet the National Registry of Exonerations, a joint project by the law schools at the University of Michigan and Northwestern University, has documented 150 instances since 1989 of people who falsely confessed to crimes they were later found innocent of. As well, the Innocence Project, a nonprofit legal advocacy organization, has found that in New York, nearly half the wrongful convictions overturned by DNA evidence involved false confessions, and that the mentally ill are particularly vulnerable to interrogation tactics. Yeah. Prosecutors said that there was no record of him ever being treated by any mental health professionals for a major mental illness. That doesn't mean anything at all. But his lawyer said that there were filings that he has had medical records spanning more than 20 years that establish a serious psychological impairment. So I'm just trying to see. I'm just trying to see if I can find out what happened at the end of this case. Um, let's see. What can I find? So we talk about the witnesses who their stories don't match. Okay. So in the years after Eaton disappeared, Stan and Julie Patz had endured many investigative dead ends. In 2002, after 23 years of hurt and despair, Stan Patz thought justice was within reach. Okay, we know that. Okay. Um, then there's the Jose Ramos, who was a convicted pedophile who was dating Eaton's babysitter at the time of his disappearance and who admitted being with Eaton on the day he disappeared. Then prosecutors are left with an extraordinary challenge in order to secure a conviction. Yeah. Um, so, update February 14th, 2017. A Manhattan jury on Tuesday convicted Pedro Hernandez of murdering 6-year-old Eaton Patz in 1979. The jury accepted the prosecution's argument that Hernandez, then a teenage clerk in a bodega near Patz's home, lured the boy into the store's basement, strangled him, and disposed of the body in a box on the city streets. The first trial of Hernandez resulted in a hung jury. So, there you go. Telling you, man, sometimes they can be so stinking corrupt. And I think not only bringing around awareness to people about just being hyper aware of everything around you and people around you, also being hyper aware that if you ever are in one of these situations, you never speak to investigators without a lawyer. Innocent or not, you don't do it. And you always demand that it be recorded. That's just the way I see it. Even if you're innocent, because they can't be trusted, you absolutely need to make sure you have a lawyer present. So now we've heard those stories. Let's talk about from forensicscolleges.com, the fraud in forensics. There are 5 cases of abuse and evidence mishandling. Okay. So, Amanda Knox. November 2nd, 2007, American college student Amanda Knox returned to her flat in Perugia, Italy. She found the bathroom she shared with her roommate, Meredith Kircher, covered in blood. The carnage disturbed Knox, who described her roommate as neat and tidy. Knox had spent the night with her boyfriend, Rafael Solicito, and she attempted to get into Kircher's room, which was locked. Solicito tried to force the door open and failed, prompting him to call the police. Philomena Romanelli, the third roommate, returned home following a phone conversation with Knox. Fearing the flat had been robbed, Romanelli began rummaging around, unknowingly disturbing the crime scene. It was Romanelli who uncovered Kircher's 2 cell phones in a garden nearby, and she requested that the police break into Kircher's room. After the police refused, Romanelli's friend broke through the door to uncover Kircher's bloody and partially naked body. Autopsy reports indicated that most of Kircher's injuries, bruising and cuts near the genital region, were sustained as a result of being restrained during the sexual violence. Both Knox and Solicito were arrested and charged with Kircher's murder due to trace amounts of Knox's DNA found on the kitchen knife, the presumed murder weapon, and Solicito's DNA found on Kircher's bra clasp. Once Meredith Kircher's room was thoroughly searched, police uncovered fingerprints and DNA belonging to Rudy Guade, I don't know, who had gone on a date with the victim the night of her murder. Still convinced of Knox and Solicito's guilt, the prosecution spun a narrative claiming the couple had partnered with Guade in Kircher's murder. During the June 2011 appeals trial, experts uncovered the numerous flaws in the forensic evidence levied against Knox and Solicito. For example, the police didn't wear caps or change gloves as they collected items, allowing cross-contamination of the objects in the room. Experts also noted that while the alleged murder weapon did contain trace amounts of Knox's DNA, it was curiously free from the victim's DNA. On March 27, 2015, both Amanda Knox and Rafael Solicito were exonerated for the murder of Meredith Kutcher. Wow, that's news to me. I had no idea. I remember watching the movie about Amanda Knox, and boy, the way they did it, they sure made her look so stinking guilty. Seriously. Wow, well, good. If she's innocent, then, she doesn't deserve to be behind bars, and she should get a settlement for the life that they took from her. Because it was 2007, so let's say 2008. What is that? 18 is 10 years. So 7 years she spent in prison? Wow. Okay, O.J. Simpson. On June 13, 1994, the bodies of Ron Goldman and the ex-wife of O.J. Simpson, Nicole Brown, were found outside of Brown's home. They'd been stabbed multiple times. When detectives arrived at O.J. Simpson's home to inform him of the death of his ex-wife, they noticed blood on Simpson's white Ford Bronco. Without a search warrant, Detective Mark Fuhrman jumped over the external wall and opened the gate for the other 3 detectives present, claiming they believed Simpson might have been injured and went to investigate. While walking along the outside of the house, Mark Fuhrman uncovered a matching bloody glove to one found at the crime scene. During the trial, all of the missteps of the forensic team came to light, including the possibility of evidence tampering and obvious evidence mishandling, as well as the glaring absence of evidence security. The defense noted several items that had gone missing, including a vial of blood from O.J. Simpson. Jurors, infuriated by evidence of racism within the LAPD, questioned whether the missing blood was a result of planted evidence on the part of the detectives. Furthermore, Simpson's Bronco, which had been impounded at an LAPD facility, was entered at least twice without authorization. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty on October 3rd, 1995. Um, so I was really young when this happened, and I remember seeing some of it on TV. And the older I got and learned more about it, the more I don't necessarily think that he killed her himself, but I have very high suspicion that he had someone do it for him. I truly believe that O.J. Simpson is guilty of something and should be in prison for that. David Cam, on September 28, 2000, a retired Indiana State Trooper, returned home to find his wife and 2 children dead of gunshot wounds. Cam believed his son was still alive and attempted CPR on the 7-year-old. When his son failed to respond, he called 911. 3 days later, Cam was arrested for the deaths of his family. A state forensic analysis claimed that Cam's t-shirt had been stained with the wife's blood in patterns suggesting he was the perpetrator. During Cam's trial, the prosecution stated that Cam had dual motives, a $750,000 life insurance policy, and alleged infidelity. On March 17, 2002, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to 195 years in prison. In 2004, the Indiana Court of Appeals overturned the conviction and ordered a new trial. The case caught a break in 2005 when the DNA of career criminal Charles Boney was matched to a sweatshirt at the scene of the crime. Boney's history included attacking women. Boney ultimately claimed it was Cam who murdered the family. Cam was charged once again, this time as a co-conspirator with Boney. In 2009, the convictions were reversed by the Indiana Supreme Court. During the third trial, the defense presented evidence that the initial blood spatter expert had falsified his credentials and had no history of working with blood splatters. Additionally, a Dutch forensic expert found Boney's DNA under Cam's fingernails and her DNA on a sweatshirt, two pieces of evidence which sealed his conviction. On October 24th, 2015, after spending 13 years in prison for the deaths of his wife and two children, David Cam was acquitted and released. Florida Heights 4. On May 11, 1978, newly engaged Carol Schmall and Lawrence Leinberg were found shot in the head. Schmall had been raped 7 times. An eyewitness claimed to have seen Dennis Williams, Kenneth Adams, and Willie Range in the abandoned townhouses where the bodies of the victims were found. Another witness named Paula Gray, a woman with an IQ of 55 who would later recant her testimony, thereby facing perjury charges, added Vernil Jemerson to the attackers. A final eyewitness named Marvin Simpson came forward 5 days after the murders, identifying 4 completely different men as the killers. But the police failed to investigate these claims. The Ford Heights 4, all black men, were tried by an all-white jury. During the first trial in 1978, state serologist Michael Podlecki testified that at least one of the rapists had type A secretor blood, a trait shared with approximately 25% of the population. Podlecki also testified that both Williams and Adams tested positive for being type A secretors. An assertion later refuted by an independent forensic witness. When the prosecution presented hairs found in the back of Williams's car, Podlecki claimed they were consistent with the victims. Williams, Adams, Range, and Gray all received harsh sentences. Jemerson was not initially convicted because Gray had withdrawn her testimony, although she later testified against him in a plea deal with the prosecutors, and he was sentenced to death. After various appeals and retrials, students from the Northwestern University Medill School of Journalism, including award-winning NPR journalist Laura Sullivan, presented new evidence in 1996. They uncovered Marvin Simpson's genuine eyewitness account. Coupled with confessions from the murderers and DNA evidence, Williams, Adams, Range, and Jefferson were finally exonerated after 17 years in prison. In 1999, the Four Heights Four won a $36 million in damages from Cook County, the largest settlement for a civil rights case in U.S. history. Cameron Todd Willingham. On December 23, 1991, a fire ravaged Cameron Todd Willingham's house, killing his 2-year-old daughter and 1-year-old twins. While Willingham escaped with minor burns, his wife had been out Christmas shopping, and despite her insistence that Willingham had never been abusive and had no motive for the crimes, he was arrested. At the trial, James Grigson, a psychiatrist known as Dr. Death for frequently recommending the death penalty for defendants, was called as an expert witness. Grigson cited Willingham's tattoo of a skull and serpent and some of his music posters as evidence that he was a sociopath. He did not perform a thorough psychiatric evaluation. Furthermore, Johnny Webb, a jailhouse informant, testified against Willingham, claiming he had confessed to the arson leading to the murders. Webb would later recant his testimony, telling a reporter he was mistaken as a result of being on multiple medications for bipolar disorder. The recanted testimony was never reported to Willingham's attorneys, and the prosecution ultimately cited the statute of limitations. Manuel Vasquez, a state deputy fire marshal, took the stand and testified to seeing puddle configurations, or i.e., areas of rapid burning, suggesting the use of accelerants in the fire and indicating arson. Vasquez also claimed that Willingham's first and second degree burns were most likely self-inflicted with the intent to avert suspicion. It wasn't until many years later that investigators would attribute his wounds to Willingham being in the fire before the flashover, or i.e., when the entire room suddenly ignites in flames. Sadly, Willingham was found guilty and executed February 17, 2004. Acclaimed fire investigator and scientist Gerald Hurst found Vasquez's claims to be dubious and stated that there was no evidence to suggest arson. In 2010, after more than a year of renewed investigation and stiff opposition from embarrassed state authorities, including Governor Rick Perry, the Texas Forensic Science Commission, led by Dr. Craig Byler, concluded that there was not ample evidence for arson, and Vasquez's testimony was hardly consistent with the scientific mindset and was more characteristic of mystics or psychics. Here's the problem. He'd already been executed. This man didn't get a second chance. It's funny how they executed him so fast. Didn't take very long at all. But, I mean, that's sad. Completely innocent. A woman loses her children and her husband all at the same time for absolutely no reason. And it took them 6 years to finally realize they'd made a mistake. So, this is about the Innocence Project. For aspiring forensics professionals, these documented abuses of the science are presented as cautionary tales. The collection and meticulous analysis of evidence aren't easy processes, and the techniques are still far from perfect. It's worth noting that as of June 2017, the federal government remains committed to keeping current processes in place. I somehow doubt that. Rebuffing scientists who had presented evidence of false applications of DNA analysis, Attorney General Jeff Sessions stated, I don't think we should suggest that those proven scientific principles that we've been using for decades are somehow uncertain and leaving prosecutors having to fend off challenges on the most basic issues in a trial. Despite setbacks in the advancement of the science, there are groups committed to exonerating falsely accused people with sound forensic evidence. For example, the Innocence Project aims to free the staggering number of innocent people who remain incarcerated and to bring reform to the system responsible for their unjust imprisonment. Founded in 1992 by Peter Neufeld and Barry Scheck, it has helped to free 350 people on DNA evidence and identified 149 alternative perpetrators as of June 2017. In short, forensic science depends not only on types of evidence with foundational and applied validity, but also on the dedicated efforts of ethics minded groups such as the Innocence Project. How many innocent people are serving sentences for crimes they didn't commit? How many criminals are walking free due to untested rape kit backlogs? Forensic scientists can be part of the solution. There's one more thing I had pulled up to talk about, and this is for Orange County. The Orange County Sheriff's Department, which mishandled evidence, and they kept it quiet for nearly 2 years. This is from NPR.org. This was back in 2019. So, a law enforcement scandal that could impact thousands of criminal cases in Orange County, California, is pitting the region's top attorneys and sheriffs against one another. The county's public defender's office on Wednesday suggested that top prosecutors covered for law enforcement, helping to keep widespread lapses in evidence booking out of public view. Now, Assistant Public Defender Scott Sanders is demanding to know who knew what and when. An internal investigation conducted 2 years ago by the Orange County Sheriff's Department, the findings of which were not made public at the time, uncovered systematic mishandling of evidence. Deputies are required to turn in evidence at the end of their shift, but the audit found that more than 70% of them failed to do so. Instead, officers frequently waited days, weeks, or even months to submit key evidence, including seized drugs, cash, photos, and videos pertaining to criminal cases. According to the report obtained from the Orange County Public Defender's Office by NPR, nearly a third of evidence collected from between February 2016 to February 2018, which included more than 98,000 department records, was submitted after the department's mandated end-of-shift deadline. On average, deputies delayed booking evidence for 3.5 days. Additionally, 27% of deputies had held on to evidence for 31 days or longer. In some cases, they never submitted any evidence at all, even when they said they had. The alarming results prompted a second, much smaller audit of a sample group about a year later, in February 2019, according to sheriff's officials. That brought even grimmer news. After extensive research, auditors determined that 47% of the reports that were supposed to include evidence did not. The auditors concluded that cultural idleness within the sheriff's department had led to inconsistent and inaccurate entries into the property evidence system. They also found insufficient booking software and no system of accountability. The findings cast doubt on the authenticity of evidence, raised concerns about chain of custody rules, and could possibly force a re examination of adjudicated criminal cases. The ramifications could be immense, potentially reversing sentences for people whose convictions relied on tainted evidence. The implications are massive. If we take their numbers, take them at their word, then by their own account, we're in the zone of 9,000 missing pieces of evidence. Despite the risk to defendants' constitutional rights, the Sheriff's Department did not share the information with any outside agencies or county departments. It wasn't until November 18th, when the Orange County Register was on the brink of publishing a story detailing the audits, that the Sheriff's Department told county supervisors of their existence. Of course, they're going to want to minimize the impact because the truth is they have no idea how many cases this affects. Sanders said he learned of the internal audits while working with a source on a different case. It was his request for the report that tipped off reporters. District Attorney Todd Spitzer told NPR that his office was also kept in the dark about the scope and disturbing results of the audits until a reporter called with questions on the same day. Since then, he said, the Sheriff's Department has ignored 2 requests from his office to share the initial report and all information pertaining to cases where evidence was mishandled. But Sheriff Don Barnes disputes that version of events. He told NPR that Spitzer's office was notified that an audit was in the works as early as 2018. That's when the department identified 15 deputies suspected of wrongdoing and began referring deputies to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Since then, Barnes said none of those deputies has been charged by Spitzer's office. I did not call the DA, or nor would I be obligated to call the DA about the results of the internal investigations, Barnes said, adding that Spicer's office should have been aware of the audit because it was referenced in many of the criminal submissions. Spicer finds the claims outrageous. There was no indication in any way whatsoever that this was a department-wide audit and that they were looking at really tens of thousands, almost 100,000 cases. Said Spicer, who was elected to the post in January. The general impression within his office was that the individual cases of wrongdoing, which trickled in over a 2-year period, were not part of a larger pattern. Never with the disclosure that there was a systematic problem or failure within his department that may have implicated many more cases. Following the publication of the story by the Register, Sheriff's Department spokeswoman Carrie Braun issued a statement saying, immediate measures were taken to ensure personnel were educated on policy and procedure for booking evidence. The department had also implemented a new protocol requiring supervisors to check that all property and evidence has been booked prior to approving any related reports. As a result of the audits, 4 deputies have been dismissed, 7 have been disciplined, and 4 internal affairs investigations are ongoing. However, on Wednesday, Barnes downplayed the results of the 2 audits, saying continued investigations into missing evidence show that all but a few remaining pieces have always been in our possession. He insisted that the Sheriff's Department has had custody of all evidence involved in cases that have already been decided by the courts. Barnes called Sanders' estimate that 9,000 pieces of evidence could be missing completely embellished and inaccurate. He says the practice by deputies of first submitting digital evidence, including photos, video, and audio recordings, to a crime lab for processing before submitting it to the property and evidence room created the appearance of a delay. That gap does not mean that evidence was mishandled or treated outside of the law, adding that deputies will no longer be allowed to do that. Meanwhile, Sanders said it was getting harder to believe that the district attorney's office was oblivious to the internal audits. They were referred 15 cases for potential prosecution, so it's not really credible that the sheriff's department was hiding the evidence. Sanders noted that under Spicer's predecessor, Tony uh, oh God, Rakakos, okay, Tony, there was a history of ignoring questionable behavior within the sheriff's department. Tony's office was kicked off the largest mass murder case in the county's history in 2015 after Sanders discovered that the sheriff's department under Barnes had failed to disclose it was missing jail informants in violation of inmates' rights, misusing jail informants in violation of inmates' rights. They're scrambling like mad right now because in reality, they never fixed the problem, Sanders said. Spitzer argues that he and Sanders are both after the same thing. Our only focus is to determine with certainty how many cases my office may have prosecuted where the evidence was never booked or it was booked in such a fashion that it calls into question the sanctity of that evidence. He said a meeting with the sheriff's office has been scheduled for next week to dive into the results of the internal audits. I will look into that more and see what came out of that. It was 2 years ago, so I'm curious to see what came out of that. However, I'm going to leave this episode here. I really do hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I know it was different, but I mean, that was on purpose. I wanted to do something different for a reason. So, with that, we're going to end it, and I'm going to tell you to please join my Facebook at Lauren Collins. I just got to say something. You can email me, gotta say something 21 at gmail.com. Join my subreddit, r/ just gotta say something. And also, two things I do want to mention. I have created some t-shirts to sell, um, and they are on my Facebook. But just in case you want to go take a look at them, and maybe order one, you can go, well, you can go to customink.com or you can email me and ask me specifically for the link. It's under I Just Gotta Say Something, and that is open until November 1st to order a t-shirt. And they are $18.02 each plus shipping. Also, on my episode on Tuesday, I think it was, I talked about women no longer being safe in prisons and about them being forced to be housed with transgender men, and that one woman is now pregnant because of this. So I was very disgusted and irritated by this, and I wanted to do something to help. So I have started a petition at change.it, which is chng.it. Or change.org, actually. You can, it's at either one, really. And it's protect women inmates from being housed with men claiming to be transgender. So I ask you to go and sign that petition. Order a t-shirt if you would like one. If these sales go pretty decently, I have another shirt design and a hoodie design that I would also like to put out there for the winter. So I'll keep up with that and I'll give you more information on that. Also, don't forget to subscribe to The Scott Ford Show. Isaac Hayes, the Cajun conservative, and his podcast, Brothers Just Searching, who's also working on some merch, which I'm excited about. Nate Savage at Savage 5050, and TV's Rob is on Woke. Anyway, just enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Be back here on Monday, and we will continue this journey of growing together. Please, if you are a blind viewer, go to my podcast on Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, anywhere, Anchor. Subscribe to the podcast and leave me a review. Or if you like to watch it on YouTube, please don't forget to like and share this video with all of your friends and your family. And you can leave me a comment and I'll get back to you. But most of all, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you see every time I upload a new video. Your support means so, so much to me. I really appreciate it. Anyway, I love all of you. Have a great day, and God bless.